To Peter von Blood, a brilliant young scientist.
Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the Never Heard of It podcast. I'm one of your hosts. As you can see, there are two. Caleb.
Yeah, and I am Michael Fight. You know, for most people, they probably thought there was just one person doing two different voices.
Yeah, and you had such an amazing laugh that I'm personally impressed to see that there's actually two of you.
It's pretty fantastic, to be quite honest. So we're doing this episode because this is a special episode. This is a Mother's Day episode. To all those moms out there, so
all the mamas and the mamas, and the mamas.
So we were going to do a movie called MILFs vs. Zombies, but we figured maybe that was a little too much. You know, a little offensive to moms,
a little tasteless.
Right. So instead, we're going to talk about the movie Mama Dracula.
I literally heard about this today.
Mama Dracula. So Mama Dracula is a 1980 film that talks. It's I would say zany.
Yeah.
That was the word I think is the only word I could think of to describe this film is zany.
That is accurate.
Yeah. So Mama Dracula was made in 1980, and to me, Mama Dracula feels like it's kind of like a Mel Brooks-esque, let's just put a bunch of gags and see what happens from there.
I can totally see that. My entire impression throughout the movie was this is a live-action Looney Tunes cartoon.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's just so wacky and slapstick and thrown together, and the scene by scene, there's not necessarily any, coherence or consistency to the jokes or anything. It's just, let's just throw it all out there and just see what happens.
Just hope for the best. As a lot of the movies that we review are kind of in that same vein, where they're just like, I don't know, man. Let's just
throw it at the wall and see what sticks.
Yes, pretty much. So Mama Dracula follows the story of Elizabeth Dracula.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Dracula. Mama Dracula follows Elizabeth Dracula. And the reason why I actually said that is because so Mama Dracula has to bathe in the blood of virgins in order to stay alive and stay young and beautiful forever, which of course is a play on the original story of Elizabeth Bathory, who was one of the very first theories of vampires, is that she would take young, beautiful virgins and she would kill them and essentially bathe in their blood, and that's how she supposedly stayed young. She was a Hungary woman in the late 1500s.
Yeah. The twist, of course, being that in this world of the questionable morals of the 80s, the virgins were hard to come by, so it was getting more and more difficult for Countess Dracula to extend her life and her beauty.
Right, but so she has two twin vampires. I thought I don't know. I feel bad. It's like the Wangenberg brothers, and they are actual twins.
Yeah.
So these twins, they're very they're kind of I guess one of many comic reliefs of the entire film. The whole film is comic relief. It is a good movie. Don't get us wrong. It's silly. It's definitely a fun watch.
Yeah.
But they play the part of, they run this dress store, this fashionable dress store called Vamp, which they call Womp, which I thought was pretty interesting. And every time
V's are W's.
Yep.
Yes.
And when they go to the Castle,
The castle.
The castle. We must go back to the castle. I am a vampire.
So we were discussing this before. I spent a good deal of the movie trying to figure out what accent they were speaking with. Were they trying to affect a Romanian or Transylvanian accent, or were they speaking with their native accents? The film was made in France or Belgium, and we realized that the characters for the most part had French accents, and sometimes were trying to put on a more Eastern European accent on top of their French accent. It was brilliant.
Yeah. Now, was it sounded like they were obviously in France or something, but it kind of also sounded like they were referencing Bulgaria and...
But they did say that they were in Transylvania.
Okay.
But... So it shifts back and forth between this village where everyone knows that they're vampires, and is actively trying to trap them or hunt them down with the pitchforks and torches and whatnot, and this city where they own this fashion store, as you said, called Vamp, calling themselves out, and no one notices or think twice about it. So clearly, very disconnected realities between this obviously like medieval peasant village and this modern metropolis somewhere in Europe,
which is super weird because like when they go to the village and the village is right up the road because they actually drive to the village at some point
frequently.
It's really weird because they go there with their like dress van, but like people are dressed like you would think like a medieval peasant is dressed, and it's like a log cabin and they're drinking out of steins and stuff. But then like 2 minutes later they're like driving around in brand new cars, or new for the 80s brand new cars, and they have TVs and stuff. And I'm like, hey, what the fuck is going on here?
Yeah. One moment they're in a horse-drawn carriage, the next they're in like a Bentley.
Right. It's super weird. So, but the weirdest part about this is that that's not really the plot of this movie.
No.
And that's the craziest part about this thing. So the plot of this movie is this Professor Von Blood, or Dr. Von Blood, and it's spelled Bloed, who is this very... He's a wacky fella. I mean, he's a very, like I could picture like a Jerry Lewis playing him.
He's like Moranis in Broderick's Body.
Yes. That is so spot on. That is perfectly spot on. So he is he's basically he's like a blood doctor, because obviously his name is Von Blood.
Yeah.
So basically what it is, he's like an alchemist of sorts, and his idea is he's trying to basically make synthetic blood. And the Mama Dracula hears about this, so she summons for him to basically set him up in her basement to create synthetic blood.
Under the pretense of joining a World Blood Congress.
Right.
Apparently all these other famous blood scientists, all his colleagues in academia are supposed to come out to this. But of course it's all a sham. And this clearly is a world where no real vampire lore exists. Well, no, vampire lore does exist.
Because he asks a bunch of questions.
He asks a bunch of questions about vampires. He understands basic vampire lore, but apparently the story of Dracula doesn't exist. Because he receives a summons from a Countess Dracula to go to Transylvania and thinks nothing of it.
Yes.
It's the perfect plan.
And so he asks, one of the questions he asks is do you, what about garlic? And one of the twins just eats garlic, and he's like, I don't like garlic, and it's just like a normal thing. Daylight, they can walk in the daylight, because they do it several times.
I mean, they run a shop in downtown.
In the middle of, and what was the other one? They,
he asked about mirrors.
Mirrors. So mirrors, they can't be seen in mirrors, right? That was his thing.
Apparently, they claim that.
Right, but then they do this mirror gag. The twins wake up and they do this mirror gag. And so if you've ever seen the movie Duck Soup with the Marx Brothers, and you remember the Harpo Marx mirror scene, if you haven't seen it, you might have also seen it. He does the exact same gag on the I Love Lucy show too. But so Harpo Marx and Groucho Marx are both they both have their sleeping stuff on, and the twins do the same thing, and they're mirroring the same thing that everyone's doing, and so the twins are doing it, and they're brushing their teeth and they're getting ready, and they're wearing the exact same thing, and Professor Von Blood comes in and sees one of them, and he thinks that they're one of them is looking in a mirror, so he starts trying to look in the mirror, and he's like. And he thinks that he's
no reflection.
He's like, I have no reflection. He thinks he's a vampire because he can't see himself in the mirror now, and he starts freaking out. And then that gag just sort of ends, and the twins just sort of laughed, and that's kind of the end of the gag. Which is it was just such a weird, completely out of the blue gag.
It's so brilliant,
but it was just so funny.
So brilliant. And that was one of the things that cemented in my brain. This is a cartoon.
Yeah,
we're actually watching a cartoon. Mel Blanc is involved somewhere in this.
He's in there going, no, do this. So Mama Dracula outside. So eventually, he figures out. Which, by the way, so the magic formula that he figures out is the housemaid there, the Fräulein housemaid who just walks around going,
no actual dialogue.
Yeah, none. She just screams at everyone like that, and she, she's a bigger, think Swedish housemaid. She's like, oh, blah, blah, blah. So she walks in, and he's like, I keep making gold. He keeps making gold
somehow
instead
he makes
of blood.
Gold instead of blood.
Right.
It's just piles and piles of gold bricks.
Shit, gold again! Just throwing gold bars everywhere. So she comes down and she goes, and she writes E equals MC squared on the board, and he has this revelation, then all of a sudden it works, which, by
cheap
the way...
lightning effects everywhere.
Right. Which, by the way, E equals MC squared is energy equals mass times the velocity squared. Yeah. It is not in any relation to this. It's the theory of the faster things go, they increase in mass. And it's all about, the theory of relativity. It has nothing to do with bioengineering in any way whatsoever.
She even kind of mimes as though she's referring to Einstein with his hair.
Right.
What is that? I'd like to point out that the lab in which Von Blood is set up in the castle, you see these large copper pots that he's working in. I recognize them immediately as copper brew kettles. And so I was watching during the credits, and they actually did film in a brewery in Belgium.
Oh, that's fine.
I forget, it was like Renault Brewery or something like that. I can't remember exactly. But they filmed in a brewery, so...
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So this is a really weird one-off movie, Mama Dracula, again, made in 1980. And when it comes to star power...
Not a lot.
There's really not a lot, except for one
hammer.
person. Well, I guess two people if you count the other people. But Mama Dracula was played by Louise Fletcher.
Louise Fletcher, who's been in a lot of things, a lot of, in my opinion, very classic roles. She was Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yep.
And as a Trekkie growing up, I was thrilled to realize that she was Kai Wynn from Deep Space Nine.
Yep.
And, of course, Mrs. Wilson in Dennis the Menace.
Of course. And if you are a fan of American literature, she plays the grandmother in the TV movie Flowers in the Attic, which is a super messed up book and movie. If you haven't read it, do that. She was in Cruel Intentions. She was recently in the show Girl Boss. She was in the show Shameless. She's been
on a couple episodes of Heroes.
Yep. Private Practice, The Genesis. Goodness gracious. The list goes on of a lot of great things that she had been in. And aside from that, the only other person that has any sort of star quality, which she plays such a minor role at the end, is Maria Schneider, who Maria Schneider is Jean in Last Tango in Paradise with Marlon Brando. And if you're familiar with that, that's the one where they basically claimed that they kind of forced sex on her, which was pretty messed up.
Yeah.
So we're going to move past that subject because that's super awkward. But... so Mama Dracula, there are many scenes of nudity in this film.
Lots of gratuitous nudity.
It is very much a romp of sorts. So basically what happens is every time a virgin goes into the dress store... into Womp. As they take their clothes off, the vampire scares them and they get captured through a mirror and they're like, virgin? Virgin? And they'll go... Yes or no, and then they go and they capture them, and that's how they do them. Right.
When you realize that all they had to do was just say no, and
then they go away because that's what happens. One of them goes no, and they're like, and they push her away. But then there's that super weird movie which reminded me that this is very much a European film. Is with the little girl. So the little girl goes through, and she accidentally finds
her way through the mirror.
And she goes in, and the guy, the vampire's like, and she lifts up her skirt, and on the front of her underwear is a cross, and he goes, and then she turns around and lifts up the back, and on the back of her underwear is the Star of David, a Jewish star, and he goes, whoa! It's just so unnecessary and weird. I just didn't understand... why was that more offensive than the cross? I just don't. It was such a silly movie, which I recommend. Yeah, it was fun to watch.
Yeah.
So Mama Dracula is available on TubiTV.com. There is a link below to the exact movie, so you can go ahead and click that. And I hope you join us on our podcast. We're at anchor.fm/neverheardofit. And we have weekly episodes. Every Sunday, we release a brand new episode where we talk about pretty much the wildest and weirdest movies we can possibly think of.
Yeah. All this month of May, we've been celebrating the end of the European campaign of World War II in May of 1945 with movies about killing Nazis.
As you should.
So classics like Iron Sky and Kung Fury. So if you haven't checked out our podcast, now's as good a time as any to start.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks a lot for joining us, and we will catch you again this Sunday.
Thanks for watching and or listening.